CNN Breaking News.
Breaking news, Attorney General Jeff Sessions speaks out. This is CNN Tonight. I'm Don Lemon. Sessions telling Fox News he does not believe anything he said in his pre-election meeting with Russia's ambassador was improper or unwise. That's in the wake of the Attorney General's announcement today that he will recuse himself from any investigation related to the Trump campaign. President Trump defending Sessions tonight and charging the Democrats are, quote, overplaying their hand. I want you to listen to this moment from the Attorney General's interview with Fox tonight.
I don't believe there's anything wrong with a United States Senator meeting with an ambassador from Russia.
Right.
I see you ask a lot of questions about it, and that's fine. But I think it was a perfectly reasonable meeting. I had professional, non-political staffers with me, and we discussed some important international issues. I learned something perhaps in that meeting. I usually did. And so that's what happened. People were ambassadors were coming by to see me pretty often.
Here with more on the Sessions firestorm and what it means for the Trump administration, CNN senior White House correspondent Sarah Murray. Sarah?
Well, Don, tonight the administration had hoped they would still be riding high on this glow of President Trump's speech to Congress, which they feel was very successful. But instead, they're facing yet another firestorm over Russia. We saw Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, decide to recuse himself today from any potential probe about interactions between Donald Trump's campaign advisors and suspected Russian operatives throughout the presidential campaign. Now, the president today says he has total confidence in Jeff Sessions. So for now, his job could be secure. But just as this was happening, a whole new set of questions arose about just exactly who in Donald Trump's circle was talking with campaign advisors. A senior administration official confirms what the New York Times first reported, that there was actually an in-person meeting in December between the Russian ambassador, between Michael Flynn, the ousted national security advisor, as well as Donald Trump's son-in-law, now a senior advisor here at the White House, Jared Kushner. This is not a meeting that was disclosed throughout the transition process when there were so many questions about Michael Flynn's discussions with the Russian ambassador. This administration official tells me they weren't aware of this meeting at the time. It wasn't brought into their attention until later. And we're also learning there was, in fact, a conversation between Donald Trump's national security advisors on the campaign and the Russian ambassador right around that Republican convention last summer. That's just an indication, Don, that this story is not going to end here, that even though Jeff Sessions explained his contacts with the Russian ambassador, even though he recused himself, it's clear this Russia story and the shadow it's casting over this White House is going to continue.
Sarah Murray, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I want to bring in now Robert Ray, a former federal prosecutor and independent counsel for the Whitewater investigation. Also, John Flannery, former federal prosecutor for the Southern District of New York, and attorney Stuart Kaplan, a former special agent with the FBI. Good evening. Thank you all for coming on this evening.
Good evening.
Yes, Robert, I want to play another clip from the Attorney General's interview on Fox tonight. Here it is.
I had not had any such meetings, was not meeting with Russian officials on a continuing basis to advance any campaign agenda. Sometime before that, I had met in my office in an official way with the Russian ambassador, and so that was the answer I gave, and I think it was an honest answer, Tucker. I thought I was responding exactly to that question, and it really became a big brouhaha.
Robert, what do you think?
Look, I think, again, a lot of this stuff gets to what are we really asking people here about what happened. If they had meetings, I don't think meetings by themselves really amount to a whole lot. I mean, really the question is, was there complicity with the Russians? Was there anything that suggests that there were promises made about what would be done after the election?
But that wasn't what he was questioned about in his confirmation hearing.
Look, I get it.
In the confirmation hearing, he was asked, did you meet with any Russians?
Yeah,
did you have conversations?
But that's the reason why the question's being asked, and he's trying to explain, look, I understood the question to be in my capacity as a surrogate for the campaign, as you basically have accused me of. did I do something untoward or improper with regard to Russians? And the answer that came back, and he's acknowledged, and the president has acknowledged, that the language could have been more careful, and it would have been better, obviously, in retrospect, to have disclosed it. I think we're all in agreement about that now.
Yeah. John, what do you think? Do you think he committed perjury? What do you think about the question? Robert says the question is what happened during the meetings, what was discussed.
Well, I think that, like most politicians, they're very dangerous in the sense that they can't keep their mouths shut. And so they often compromise their own best defense. So if he just said he was going to recuse himself today, he would have been better off than what he said. But now we finally know what the motive was. It's all about sanctions. When he met with the ambassador at the Republican convention, they were gutting a plank that was to have sanctions against Russia. And the thing that he remembered today in his press conference was he says, oh yeah, he came in and he was really upset about Ukraine, sanctions. And what was the meeting with Flynn about? Sanctions. And what was the meeting in early December about? I'll bet you it was about sanctions.
He's not saying that explicitly, though, John. That's not what he's saying.
Well,
you're
no,
inferring that from his conversation about the Ukraine, that they weren't happy and so on.
Yeah, well, they weren't happy, but I think they were more than not just happy. And he said a couple of other things. He said, I should have identified my meeting with the ambassador. And when he was asked about the campaign, he said two things. One is he says, well, they're so gossipy, these ambassadors. And he also said, I think he came to my office because of the fact that I held this position in the campaign, which was that he headed the National Security Advisory Committee for Trump. You put those things together and you have the hypothesis to test in a real investigation with subpoenas by a special prosecutor. And if we're going to have an invertebrate Republican Congress that isn't going to do its duty by the country, and we can't trust the Justice Department, we have a constitutional crisis if we can't appoint an independent counsel to do what nobody else seems ready to do.
Are you saying perjury?
I'm saying perjury, yes. And I'm saying it's stronger today. And there are other prosecutors who see the facts as they're unfolding. And I'm sure they're saying now that his general statement that he didn't talk to any Russian representatives, when you take into account what he said today, not just on Fox, but at the press conference as reported by the Washington Post. There was a sidebar report on the things that he said and curses he said that weren't in the transcript that the Washington Post reported.
All right, so I want to get Stuart in. Stuart, John is saying that he, with his explanation, and the more he keeps talking, I think this is what he's saying, he's backing himself into a corner here and letting on more than he probably wants the general public to know, or anyone who might investigate this.
Yeah, we should be debriefing his staffers immediately.
Stuart, do you agree with that?
Well, certainly, Don, you have to look at the statute. The statute requires that notwithstanding the statement is false. We know today, based upon his statement, his own admission, that he made a false statement. But the statute requires that the statement was made willfully, meaning in his mind he had the intent to mislead the question or the person who was asking the question. And that's going to be a very difficult, if not an impossible hurdle to overcome. Also understand that the law requires...
Go ahead, Robert.
Well, also understand...
Why do you think it won't happen, Robert?
Well, because perjury cases are difficult to prove. That's not really what's going on here. I don't think any reasonable, responsible person, given even what we know in the 24 hours that this issue has been a story, that the Attorney General was intending to intentionally mislead the Senate with regard to this issue.
He said, I should have told them about the ambassador.
That's
what he said. He said that today.
That's not perjury. That's
not
even close to perjury.
That's intent.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Not even close to perjury.
Stuart.
Yeah, Don, I wasn't implying by any stretch of the imagination that the Attorney General, in fact, made a willful, misleading statement. What I was saying is that the investigation would require to establish that, in fact, the statement he made was made willfully. Keep in mind also, Don, that the statute requires and the law requires that they would have to have established corroborating evidence. It's not just the fact that there was a false statement. They're also going to have to establish other evidence outside the context of just the statement itself. I don't think that this in any way is a chargeable offense. I think it's a red herring. It's a big distraction. It's certainly not the way I would want. No. Well, I don't think it's the way that someone wants to start their career 3 weeks into the job.
John, go ahead.
That's how he got the job. Why do you think people lie about things? Because they're conscious of a guilt, of something they did wrong. Shakespeare said guilt spills itself for fear of being spilt. That's what happened today at the press conference. He gave us his motive for misleading us. And the underlying offense that we're investigating is, what are the Russians doing to interfere in our election, and why would the Trump campaign cooperate? It's about the sanctions. It was about the sanctions that President Obama put in late December. It was about the sanctions that were put in earlier about Crimea. That's what this is about. That's the trade-off. That's the hypothesis you test in an investigation. Is this the motive for allowing the interference in our presidential election?
I want to get in here, but Robert wants to go. Robert.
That's a whole lot of inferences piled on top of
No,
inferences.
that's not inferences piled on inferences.
That's why we have investigations.
Why did Flynn leave office? Why did he leave his office?
Let him answer, John.
This investigation is not going to be led as a perjury investigation of the Attorney General. The key news today is not whether he testified and the facts were either false or true or what they were. The key issue today is that he made a decision to recuse himself, and he did it in the best interest of the country. The Department of Justice is perfectly capable of handling this.
No, they're not.
Oh, yes, they are. The Deputy Attorney General was retained by President Obama. He's a career prosecutor. He's going to have a hearing next week. He'll be confirmed, and the Department of Justice will go on just fine with the Attorney General recused in order to look into this issue with the assistance of the FBI to fully and fairly investigate it.
That's a Pollyannish scenario if I ever heard
That's
one.
the way the system works.
Stuart,
that is how the system doesn't work when the subject of an investigation heads the entire department.
The Deputy Attorney General is not the subject of the investigation.
Wall Street Journal said today that he was the subject of an investigation, not a target, meaning they had enough to indict him, but he was the subject of investigation according to today's Wall Street Journal. That is a critical thing to consider for an entire department that bills itself as the law enforcement officer of the nation.
It's a big department.
Do you think you don't think the Deputy Attorney General considers herself the boss, Jeff Sessions, his or her boss?
Not in a recusal situation. I mean, the boss is going to be walled off. The boss, with regard to this investigation, is going to be the Deputy Attorney General.
John?
Well, there is no way to repair the fact that the head of the entire department, you have to believe, even by appearances, has nothing to do with anything going on in the department.
Ask Jim Comey.
I've been on this very show criticizing Comey for how he conducts an investigation. I don't know where he is.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Stuart, you got to jump in. We'll see you soon.
Yeah, that's all right, Don.
We'll get you back soon. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. We come right back. Russia's ambassador in the spotlight tonight over revelations of multiple meetings with members of President Trump's team. But what do we know about the ambassador, and what is he trying to achieve?